In this lesson, we'll explore how to create flowline toolpaths. Flowline toolpaths utilize the general curvature of a surface to guide the tool along the path. Now, this particular file we have here has some geometry that is very suitable for the flowline toolpath. This particular file is a solid file, but as you can see, I can turn on level 30 and I'll make it active, and I'll turn off level 4. And we have a copy of the geometry that we want to focus on, and I'm going to hide everything else. So these are surfaces, and if I hit Alt-S to unshade my model, so now I'm looking at the wireframe version of it, you can see that most of the surfaces have what I call a grid structure. So we have arcs or curves that go across, and we have arcs and curves that go along. Now these aren't really arcs or curves, they're just a representation of the surface itself. Now if we look closely in this area, this seems to have a nice set of what we call UV curves. Okay, the UV curves are created on the surface and they show the overall flow of the surface. But this particular surface here does not have a consistent across and along motion. In other words, we don't have curves that are going all the way around like we do see here and here. And if I tried creating a flowline toolpath, it would either cause errors or give undesirable results because of this anomaly we have here. Now you'll also notice we have the same issue over here. And if I zoom out, we have the same issue right here as well. So let's go ahead and hit Alt-S again to shade it. And I'll fit this to my screen. And one of the things we can do before we create the flowline toolpath is to adjust the UV curves that form this surface. So if I go to the Surfaces tab, we have an option here called Reflow UV. However, Reflow UV utilizes wireframe geometry to guide it along the surface that you want. So the first thing we need to do is go into wireframe and create curves along these edges. Now I'm in 2D, I'm going to change this to 3D. And I'm going to create a curve along these 4 edges here. And while I'm at it, I'll do it over here as well, because we know that this was the other surface we need to work on. Now on the Surfaces tab, I'll go to Reflow UV, and it's asking for a surface. And notice before I select a surface, I have boundary curves selected here, which means as soon as I select a surface, it's going to prompt me for those boundary curves. And you can see right here, select up to 4 chains. So I'm just going to select these 4 here. And when I click OK, you'll notice if I zoom in, we have a lot of curves, but they follow the outside shapes of that surface. So I can adjust this, for example, let's just do 5. So we're going to do 5 V flow lines. Now you see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. But as you can see, we're reflowing the UV curves to better follow this surface. So I'm going to hit apply because I want to do it again over here. So I select the surface. I'm going to select these 4 curves. And it looks real good, so we'll click OK. So now, let's take a look at the surfaces again in wireframe mode. And everything looks good. Sometimes you'll see that you have a curve that shows up here and it kind of terminates. Well, that's kind of what the toolpath will do. So imagine if you had a tool come along this shape here and then stop and retract. I'll point that out because we may see that in the end result. And we're not going to go in and modify the UV curves of this surface, but we certainly could. So to access the toolpath, we go to Toolpaths, and then it's under the 3D gallery, and it's called Flowline. So I'm going to select these surfaces here. And of course, I could window select, but I'm not going to select every surface, which is why I'm not window selecting. And I forgot that one. So we got all the surfaces. Now when I hit end selection, we get this toolpath surface selection window that pops up. And this is a little different than what we've seen in the past. And this is specifically for a Flowline toolpath. The big option down here is what I utilize a lot. It's called Flowline. And here's where you can look at the various contours or flowline data of the geometry selected. So as an example, let's move this over here. We have cut direction. And by clicking on it, it'll alternate. So now the cut direction is along the shape. So imagine if this is the river and the water is flowing along the river. That's how this cut is going to be made because of the cut direction. If we change this again, we're now going back and forth across the river. So we're going to change this back. We also have offset, if you wanted to offset it below or above. And step direction, if you wanted to start up here and go to the right, or start here and go to the left. So as you can see, we have the cut direction going this way and the step direction going down. So we should see that with all of these pieces of flowline data. And we see it for all of these as we go around to the end. So, as you've gathered by now, what I like to do is click OK and go into the toolpath, and we can always make changes later. So, we have the 15 drive surfaces. And if we wanted to do a check surface, which would be a surface to avoid, we could add that. I'm just going to click OK and go right into our surface finished flowline parameters page. We're going to use a 1/4 inch ball end mill. Let's call this flowline. And under the surface parameters, we have our traditional settings for stock to leave on drive surfaces and so forth. But under the finished flowline parameters, here's where we can choose our step over and our cut control. For now, I'm just going to accept the defaults and note that we have zigzag turned on. And I'm going to click OK. So what we have here as a result is some pretty efficient and very smooth flowing toolpath motion that follows the overall shape of this surface. So if I go to the Toolpaths tab and I backplot this, I'm just going to hit play. You see how it goes back and forth along the entire shape of what I call the river, from one side working down to the bottom, and then back up the other side. Now if we look at some of these retract moves here, we can control that with our gap settings and possibly even changing the flowline data. If I click OK here, in shade, you'll see that we have the nice flowline data that goes all along this surface, and it continues on all the way around. And again, if you wanted to change the cut direction, you could go back into your flowline data, and we'll change the cut direction. So click OK, and then we'll regenerate this. So now you can see we're going back and forth from one end to the other. So in this example, we explored some of the flowline toolpath parameters. Now understand, for this type of toolpath, it's very suitable for certain types of geometry. And in this particular case, this is a very good example of how you can utilize flowline toolpath data to get the desired toolpath that you'd like.